Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 6 tight end and quarterback rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, talking about my top 16 at both positions. So if you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, please be sure to travel down to the description of the video. There are timestamps available there. While you're down there, be sure to subscribe. Thank you very much. All right, let's begin by talking about the tight end position in regards to matchups as we approach Week 6, based on receiving statistics allowed by each individual defense against the tight end position. We find that the Bengals, Panthers, Steelers, Seahawks, and Packers are the most advantageous matchups going into the given week based on receiving statistics allowed via receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns in a half PPR scoring format. As we are all aware, touchdowns at the tight end position are incredibly impactful. Typically on a given weekly basis, about 7 to 8 of the top 12 tight ends within a given week score a touchdown within their score line. So this week, the question is, do we want to play the big name players like a Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, Sam LaPorta, Theo Johnson in a difficult matchup? Or do we want to play players like Jake Tongs, Hunter Long, Evan Ingram, who may not have as much sustainable success as of late, but are all taking on top 10 matchups at the position? Of course, Tampa Bay, Seattle, New York Jets giving up their fair share of points to opposing tight ends as well. This is a discussion that we'll have over the course of today's episode and of course for the entirety of this week, but I wanted to first and foremost share some of the more advantageous and of course some of the more disadvantageous matchups going into the given week. Like I mentioned before, the Eagles, Chiefs, Bills, Falcons, and the tight ends that they're taking on. A lot of those names are auto starts in which we may have to go in that direction despite how difficult of a matchup they'll be facing. Now, before I get into talking about the tight ends at a top 16 capacity, quick reminder, later today, after the New York Giants take on the Philadelphia Eagles, I'll be live streaming here on the channel. Speaking of tonight's game, for those of you who are going to potentially go ahead and follow me on my predictions and my plays via Betr, be sure to travel down to the description of the video. I'll be putting together those plays at the end of today's episode. But for those of you who are trying to go ahead, check out those plays, and of course, get my rankings every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season from my email sent directly to yours. Be sure to sign up today using code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of 10, and make a first time play within a real cash play, picking more or less on two player statistics. I really like AJ Brown, Scat tonight. I also like both of the tight ends, as Thursday Night Football has fared relatively well for tight ends thus far this season. Nonetheless, for those of you who want to get those rankings, check out the description. All that information's down there to be able to take advantage of it. And of course, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. And new users who sign up today get a free $10, so take advantage of the opportunity. Thank you very much. All right, let's begin with a tight end conversation with our number one, Jake Ferguson, who's coming off of 4 consecutive games of 7 or more receptions, back-to-back weeks with 1 receiving touchdown minimum, and now has an opportunity of taking on the Carolina Panthers, who are quite literally the second best matchup at the position, allowing 14.82 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. Recently, Miami, their tight ends combined for 11 catches, 116 and a touchdown. New England, 3 for 63 and a touchdown. Arizona, 8 catches, 123. Jacksonville, 5 catches, 65 and a touchdown. Everyone has succeeded at the tight end position against the Carolina Panthers. So why not Jake Ferguson, the number one tight end in fantasy, to continue his streak of success? Number 2, we have Trey McBride. Whether it is Kyler Murray or Jacoby Brissett under center, quite frankly, we are in good hands this week. If we go back and look at Jacoby Brissett as the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns in 2022, in the 11 games in which he was the starter, he was averaging 8.64 targets per game to his tight ends, which led to 10.65 fantasy points per game. Then when we travel to 2024, in games in which Jacoby Brissett was the starting quarterback of the Patriots from weeks 1 through 5, 8 targets per game to his tight ends, 9.73 fantasy points per game. When you have the number one tight end in the National Football League playing on your team, regardless of who's playing quarterback, the opportunities are going to be going in the direction of Trey McBride because the offense revolves around him. Therefore, expect for a lot of upside, and in a negative game script against the Indianapolis Colts, whether it is Kyler or Jacoby Brissett, there's going to be a lot of success found. Number 3, speaking of the Indianapolis Colts, we have Tyler Warren, who's coming off of another great week, found himself in the end zone, and now has an opportunity of taking on the Cardinals, who, even though they are the 11th best matchup at the position, allowing 11.36 fantasy points per game, the only reason they aren't a greater matchup is because they've only allowed 1 receiving touchdown to opposing tight ends. Otherwise, they have given up the second most targets, 3rd most receptions, and 5th most receiving yards to opposing tight ends. So expect for Tyler Warren to have himself a huge week, as we have recently seen tight ends against the Arizona Cardinals. Tennessee, 8 for 82. Seattle, 5 for 76 and a touchdown. Carolina, 11 for 83. And New Orleans, 8 for 76. So many yards in the direction of tight ends. Expect for a big week here from Tyler Warren. Tucker Kraft is going to close out the S tier because he has an incredible matchup against quite literally the number one matchup at the position. The Bengals allowing 15.1 fantasy points per game. Of course, Detroit, this most recent week, Brock Wright, Sam LaPorta combining for 7 catches, 101 and 2 touchdowns. Denver the week before, 8 for 66. Minnesota scored 2 touchdowns from their tight ends. Cleveland had 100 receiving yards with their tight ends against this defense. Therefore, we are anticipating that Tucker Kraft off of the bye week, the tight end that as of right now is number 6 amongst all in terms of fantasy points per game on average, is expected to have himself another huge week here with an advantageous matchup on hand. Number 5, we have Travis Kelce, who's going into a potentially implicated shootout with a 52.5 point total and them being home favorites against the Detroit Lions. Coming off of a week in which he had a season-high target, reception, and receiving yard count, this is incredibly impactful for the potential of his success. With Juju Smith-Schuster playing less opportunities within the slot position, that means an uptick of targets for Travis Kelce. And with Xavier Worthy dealing with his ankle injury, it just lends to even more opportunity in the direction of Travis Kelce, who's, again, coming off of a great game of 8 targets, 7 catches, 61, and a touchdown. I'm hoping for very similar numbers against Detroit this week. Number 6, we have Hunter Henry. Again, in the last couple weeks, we have seen the unleashing of Stefon Diggs within this offense. Like I mentioned yesterday, Stefon Diggs in the last 2 games is being targeted on 46% of the routes that he is running, which is an incredibly high number and probably unsustainable. But as we progress into the upcoming matchup against the New Orleans Saints, who have given up their fair share of fantasy points to every single position, they've specifically given up the 6th most points to opposing tight ends, 13.26 thus far this season. We've this most recent week, seen the New York Giants tight ends, 10 catches, 85, 2 touchdowns, Buffalo 43 and a touchdown, San Francisco 46 and a touchdown, and Arizona 8 catches for 74. Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper should both be in line for a lot of upside. But for our fantasy team's sake, hopefully Hunter Henry is going to be the one scoring the touchdowns this week. Number 7, we have Darren Waller, who slowly but surely is getting himself more exposure to opportunity. Earlier today, there was a statement made by the coaching staff saying that he's only going to continue to get more and more snaps as we continue, as they expand his role. The fact of the matter is, back-to-back weeks of over 15 fantasy points is incredibly promising. But on top of that, this most recent week against the Carolina Panthers, his final reception was made with 10 minutes and 48 seconds left in the second quarter. They ignored him for the entirety of 3 quarters almost. And if we continue to see him run cardio routes for a majority of second halves, Darren Waller's going to crash out. And I'm hoping that's not going to be the case, because when you take on the Los Angeles Chargers, you're going to be in a negative game script, underdogs at home. The assumption is a lot of passing in the direction of one of their most talented receiving options outside of Jalen Waddle. Therefore, I'm expecting even more upside this week in terms of target opportunity for Darren Waller. Number 8, we have David Njoku, who's coming off of his first game with Dylan Gabriel overseas, 9 targets, 6 catches, 67, and a receiving touchdown, and now has an opportunity of taking on the 3rd best matchup at the position against the Pittsburgh Steelers. We have seen David Njoku throughout his entire career take advantage of the matchup against the Steelers. This most recent year, week 14 against Pittsburgh, 13 targets, 7 catches, 42 and a touchdown for 13.7 fantasy points. We have seen opposing tight ends against this team as of late. Seattle 57 and a touchdown. New England going for 10 catches, 118 and 2 touchdowns. Therefore, expect for a lot of upside for David Njoku, even with Harold Fandon still in the mix. Number 9, we have Dalton Kincaid, who's coming off of his career high of 108 receiving yards, but now has technically the toughest matchup at the tight end position, taking on the Atlanta Falcons. But the Atlanta Falcons haven't taken on elite level tight end play, specifically because the tight ends they have faced haven't really seen much opportunity. We're talking about Cade Otton, we're talking about TJ Hawkinson, we're talking about the Panthers tight ends and Zach Ertz with Marcus Mariota. Therefore, my assumption is that with Kincaid having scored a touchdown in 3 of the last 5 games, getting himself more exposure to opportunity, AJ Terrell likely to lock up Keon Coleman on the outside, and of course the run-stop defense of the Falcons playing incredibly well. This will lead to a lot of receiving opportunity for Khalil Shakir and Dalton Kincaid over the middle of the field. Moving on to our number 10. We have Sam LaPorta, who is in a very difficult position himself, very similar to Dalton Kincaid, in which he has the 3rd toughest matchup at the position. Even though this is an implicated shootout of a 52.5 point total as it currently stands, the only way in which Sam LaPorta can get into this top 10 conversation is with an incredibly high yardage count or a guaranteed touchdown, which has really not been the case thus far this season, as Brock Wright, the backup tight end, always slips away with a touchdown every now and then. Hopefully that'll go in the direction of Sam LaPorta this week, as Jameson Williams has truly been a non-factor and really just a distraction on the field in terms of pulling coverage. If he'll continue to pull coverage over the top of this Kansas City defense, fingers crossed, it'll open up more opportunities for Sam LaPorta and Amon-Ra St. Brown within a potential shootout against the Kansas City Chiefs. Number 11. we have the rookie tight end Mason Taylor. Again, you don't get double-digit targets by accident. They are designed to go in your direction. And when you have an opportunity of taking on the Denver Broncos this week, yes, it's a difficult matchup, but we have seen many of tight ends find success. Philadelphia this most recent week, 5 catches, 37 and a touchdown. Los Angeles, 5 for 46. Indianapolis, 5 for 87. It's not impossible to succeed against this defense, but we know that Justin Fields will be facing pressure for majority of this game. It'll be vital to get the ball out of his hands quickly, whether that's in the direction of course, his number one Garrett Wilson, but mainly his security blankets, Breece Hall and Mason Taylor. Again, 9 receptions last week is no joke. I think he's only going to continue to build upon that as the weeks progress. I don't expect him to have that high of a volume of opportunity, but within the upcoming week, within a negative game script, it's certainly within the realm of possibility. Number 12 is Dallas Goedert to close out this tier. Coming off a week of 9 targets, 3 catches, 19 and a touchdown. That's back-to-back weeks with 1 receiving touchdown minimum. Last week, they ditched the running game in order to try to feed their wide receivers as many looks as possible. Dallas Goedert continues to get himself highly implicated, scoring an incredible volume of fantasy points over the course of the season when healthy, and that's only going to continue into tonight's game, as the Thursday night games have served incredibly well for tight ends, even though, of course, the Giants matchup isn't the greatest. We have seen, of course, the Philadelphia Eagles, who are very familiar with that defense and the scheme, find a lot of success with Dallas Goedert over the years. So I'm hoping for Dallas Goedert to continue a successful streak here in week 6. Number 13, speaking of some NFC East teams, we have the Washington Commanders tight end, Zach Ertz, who's coming off of a goose egg of a week, 0.0 points, 1 target, 0 receptions. This is another week in which we're probably going to see Terry McLaurin out. And if that's going to be the case, we should see the Chicago Bears matchup lead to a lot more passing for this Washington Commanders attack, as this most recent week was Jayden Daniels' fewest passing attempts in 13 total games. So I am expecting a lot more usage from the tight end position in the form of Zach Ertz. We have seen many of tight ends succeed against Chicago this season. Detroit, 6 for 54 and a touchdown. Dallas, 14 for 87. Las Vegas, 5 for 46, even with a hobbled Brock Bowers. Expect for a lot more upside from Zach Ertz, who had himself 11 targets, 7 catches, 77 against Chicago in week 8 of last season. Number 14 is Kyle Pitts, who has himself a very difficult matchup as well. The only question is, can Kyle Pitts put together a performance here very similar to the ones in which he has produced thus far this season? If he's going to continue to get himself a healthy volume of target share, then that'll lead to the potential in which he can get the yardage that he needs to stay relevant. But in the event in which he doesn't score a touchdown, it's going to be a little bit sketchier for his potential. I think, again, the Buffalo Bills matchup has not served well against opposing tight ends. So if you're trying to avoid matchups in specific and you want to go for the hot hand, potentially this alternative option presented in the form of Theo Johnson could be the way that you go. Theo Johnson has an opportunity as our number 15 this week of taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, he's incredibly reliant on touchdowns as well, having scored all 3 of the receiving touchdowns that, of course, Jackson Dart has thrown over the course of the last couple weeks. It's the 4th toughest matchup. Darius Slayton is out. Thursday Night Football has served relatively well for tight ends, so fingers crossed that Theo Johnson can continue his successful streak. Daniel Bellinger could end up messing that up, considering how much target opportunity he also served last week. The final player I wanted to mention is Juwan Johnson taking on New England, which is the 7th best matchup. Johnson's had a couple, rough weeks as of late. This is his final shot to kind of get back on track. In the event in which he's not capable of doing so, he's a drop. I would even consider him a potential drop in comparison to the rest of the field right now. But as it stands, the most recent weeks against the New England Patriots defense, Buffalo 8 for 123 from their tight ends. The Carolina Panthers combined for 10 catches, 82, 2 touchdowns. Las Vegas 9 for 141. So there's a lot of potential for tight end success. Juwan Johnson just needs the opportunity, and he'll be able to continue to provide a lot of fantasy upside. All right, let's move on to the quarterback conversation in regards to matchups. As you guys can see, we have the Dallas Cowboys, Ravens, Bengals, Jets, Buccaneers giving up the most fantasy points per game via passing statistics to opposing quarterbacks. Therefore, we're excited about the potential of some of these quarterbacks like Matthew Stafford taking on the Ravens. Of course, Jordan Love coming off the bye taking on the Bengals. Bo Nix taking on the Jets. Mac Jones potentially in the mix taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Of course, once we get the confirmation that he is in the starting quarterback position, QB1, with Brock Purdy out, we could be looking in that direction. But nonetheless, just wanted to go ahead and share some of the more advantageous and, of course, additionally, the more disadvantageous matchups going into the week prior to getting into my top 16 rankings. With this all covered, let's go ahead and let's begin with our number 1. As we all know, it's Josh Allen taking on the second most difficult matchup at the position. But the Atlanta Falcons haven't really faced much quarterback talent, as they've taken on J.J. McCarthy in a shambles game, Bryce Young, who both those quarterbacks combined for 0 passing touchdown, but when they have taken on at least decent quarterback play, Marcus Mariota had 2 passing touchdowns, Baker Mayfield 3 passing touchdowns. When we're talking about the best quarterback in football, who has rushing upside, who's coming off of their first loss at home since 2023, I'm expecting them to go down to Atlanta, indoors, no weather conditions, and light it up against that defense. Number 2, we have Patrick Mahomes, who's taken on Detroit, a 52.5 point total in implicated shootouts, home favorites against the Lions, which again, I continue to mention this. I'm incredibly surprised that that is in fact the case. But as we go into this week, the expectation is that with the Lions giving up 14.67 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, we have seen Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, Lamar Jackson, and Jake Browning all throw for 2+ passing touchdowns against this defense. My thought process is, why not Patrick Mahomes, who's coming off of 3 of the last 5 games in which he has had 57 rushing yards minimum and 1 touchdown minimum in 3 of those last 5 games. A lot of potential within the rushing category in a potential shootout in which he continues to dominate on a weekly basis. Number 3, we have Jayden Daniels. Look, like I mentioned earlier with Zach Ertz, Jayden Daniels is coming off of a game in which he had the lowest passing attempts in the last 13 games of his career, regular or postseason. It was primarily because of a run-heavy game plan in which JCM had his breakout performance. But this week against the Chicago Bears, they may not be so lucky to be able to run the ball for majority of the game and get away with that, taking on the Chicago Bears. Of course, the Bears are giving up 15.36 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, the 11th best matchup. This current game is sitting at a 49.5 point total. A potential shootout is implicated, and even though he is still dealing with that knee injury, has that knee brace, he scrambled for 40 yards in this most recent week. Yes, he had a -1 yard rushing attempt on a designed run, but ultimately, as long as he's able to scramble and get that kind of upside via the rushing category, he's going to continue to be a top 5 option weekly. Moving on to our number 4, we have Jalen Hurts playing tonight, coming off of a week against the Denver Broncos in which he only had 3 rushing yards, which is the fewest that he has had in a single game in many of years. Therefore, this week I'm expecting a lot more rushing upside, hopefully some rushing touchdown upside, as they won't ditch the running category like they did in this most recent week. But even if they do, this is one of the more advantageous matchups at the wide receiver position. So if you were ever wanting to shut up A.J. Brown about the opportunities that he's been getting, even though the target opportunity share has been there, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith can both feast within this upcoming contest under the assumption that Jalen Hurts gets a lot of looks in their direction over the course of this game. Over the course of the last couple weeks, when we have seen Thursday Night Football within 2 teams within the same division, they have been relatively close games. If this is a closer game, expect for potentially even more fantasy points from Jalen Hurts, as they won't be able to shut him down in the fourth quarter if they continue to both compete and score at a high level. Moving on to our number 5, we have Justin Herbert. In an offense that is probably trending towards a very pass-heavy approach going forward, taking on the Miami Dolphins is as advantageous as it gets, as we have seen Daniel Jones, Drake Maye, Josh Allen, and Justin Fields all torch this defense, whether it is in garbage time or regular time. Doesn't matter what it ends up being. Justin Herbert, with all the weapons that he has surrounding him, is in a perfect position to succeed, in my mind, to go down to Miami and come away with a victory, and hopefully with a game in which he has 35+ passing attempts within the upcoming matchup. All right, moving on to our number 6, we have Dak Prescott, who's coming off of 8 total touchdowns scored in the last 2 games, regardless of all of the offensive line injuries and CeeDee Lamb missing. Now he has an opportunity of taking on the Carolina Panthers, who have given up 3 touchdowns to both Drake Maye and Tua Tagovailoa in the last 2 games. I would continue to roll the hot hand of Dak Prescott. If he can perform well against the Green Bay Packers secondary, the Jets secondary, why not the Carolina Panthers this upcoming week? Number 7, we have Baker Mayfield, who's coming off of arguably his best game of his entire career, an 88% passing completion percentage against the Seahawks. Now has an opportunity of taking on the 15th best matchup against the 49ers, allowing over 15 fantasy points per game via passing statistics. The Jaguars took on this defense a couple weeks ago. Liam Cohen, the former offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, creating the blueprint for them. I understand that Chris Godwin's dealing with a bit of an injury. Bucky Irving's still potentially going to be out, but even with all those injuries, Baker Mayfield continues to put together 2+ passing touchdown performances on a given weekly basis. He's done it in like 18 of the last 21 games during the regular season. Expect for continued success here from Baker Mayfield. Number 8, we have Justin Fields, who over the course of the last 3 healthy games has put up 29, 27, and 25 fantasy points. He is on a per game average the number 1 quarterback in fantasy when healthy. And in garbage time this week against the Denver Broncos, he will thrive as he has all season long. We have seen Justin Herbert, Daniel Jones, Jalen Hurts all throw for over 280 passing yards against this Denver Broncos secondary that many teams are afraid of. But with the rushing upside that Justin Fields can, accumulate over the course of the game, the rushing touchdowns that he's potentially in line for, doesn't matter whether he does it in the first or the fourth quarter, as long as the fantasy points continue to roll in, he's a fantastic play. Number 9 is Drake Maye. With an underwhelming fantasy week, but still a huge win against a division rival on Sunday Night Football, I'm expecting a huge bounce back performance here against the New Orleans Saints, the 6th best matchup at the quarterback position, who have allowed 2+ touchdowns to Kyler, Mack, Darnold, Allen, and Dart. Every single quarterback that have played against them have scored 2 touchdowns minimum. I'm expecting Drake Maye to hopefully find himself in that upper echelon in which he can score 3 touchdowns and be able to join the likes of some of these other quarterbacks this week at a top 10 capacity. Speaking of top 10, let's close out our top 10 with Matthew Stafford taking on Baltimore. As of right now, Matthew Stafford is number 2 amongst all quarterbacks in passing touchdowns thus far this season. 4 consecutive games of 2+ passing touchdowns, and now takes on the 2nd best matchup at the position, as we have seen CJ Stroud and Patrick Mahomes both throw for over 240 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns against the Baltimore Ravens in the last 2 weeks. We're hoping for a 3 or 4 passing touchdown game here from Matthew Stafford within the upcoming matchup. Our number 11, we have Bo Nix taking on the New York Jets. Again, the 4th best matchup at the position. This most recent week, of course, Dak Prescott with a backup offensive line torched this secondary with a guy like Ryan Flournoy. So imagine what Bo Nix is going to be able to accomplish with all the weapons that he has surrounding him. The best pass blocking offensive line in the National Football League based on pass blocking win rates. The expectation is that he'll have a bunch of time to throw the ball and also has the opportunity to go ahead and scramble for some yards. Even though I do anticipate him to have to do all of his damage in the first 3 quarters, I certainly know that he's capable of it. Top 11 is at a base minimum. Number 12, we have Jordan Love coming off of a bye week, taking on the Bengals, the 3rd best matchup at the position. Joe Flacco, of course, the starting quarterback of the Bengals, could potentially elevate this game into being a higher scoring event, a back and forth matchup. That is the hope. The Bengals defense, they can't stop anybody. So the biggest risk regarding Jordan Love, and the reason why he isn't higher than the number 12 ranking spot, is because the Bengals can't stop the run either. So if this is a game in which Joe Flacco cannot find any sort of semblance of success, and Josh Jacobs ends up completely just running out the clock for majority of the game and stealing and scoring all of the touchdowns of this offense, it wouldn't surprise me. That's always the risk in regards to Jordan Love, but we're hoping for at least 2 passing touchdowns minimum within the matchup. Number 13, we have Daniel Jones. Look, Kyler is trending towards potentially missing this week. So if Jacoby Brissett is going to be taking on the Colts, this may lead to even more opportunities for this offense to score, but this could also turn into a game just like 2 of the last 3 weeks in which we have seen Jonathan Taylor come away with 3 rushing touchdowns. If in fact that is going to take place, it leads to Daniel Jones pretty much at a base minimum scoring 2 passing touchdowns, getting 200 passing yards. If he ends up falling into the end zone via his rushing statistics, I'd be surprised, as he hasn't done it as of late, but it's not out of the realm of possibility in which he can accomplish that and get himself a even higher ranking than number 13. Number 14, we have Caleb Williams. This is a Ben Johnson and Bears redemption game. The Commanders are allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And even though Caleb Williams didn't look great against the Raiders a couple weeks ago, I'm expecting him to be able to uplift this offense and hopefully getting back guys like specifically Colston Loveland off of the bye week, them all being healthy, fresh, ready to go. Hopefully, they've done a lot of self-scouting and they're going to improve this offense by looking in the direction of guys like Luther Burden and, of course, DJ Moore to be even more impactful within the upcoming matchup. That's all we need. We need to continue to stretch the field and allow for Caleb to go ahead and dice up a defense like the Commanders. Moving on to our number 15, we have Jared Goff, who as of right now, low-key is number 1 amongst all quarterbacks in terms of passing touchdowns scored this season. If Sonic and Knuckles come out there in the form of Gibbs and Montgomery and score 4 rushing touchdowns, no one would be surprised. But as of right now, with a 52.5 point implicated total, this is going to be a shootout. And if they're going to be the underdogs in this situation, as I think they're like, 1.5, 2.5 point underdogs, the expectation is that if Jared Goff's going to have to throw for a majority of the game, there's even more potential for upside. 2, 3, maybe even 4 passing touchdowns could be a lot greater than the number 15 overall this week. The final player I wanted to mention is Trevor Lawrence. Even though there are other quarterbacks such as Bryce Young against the Cowboys, Mac Jones against Tampa Bay, Sam Darnold coming off of one of his best performances of his career, we have Trevor Lawrence, who's coming off of a week of 10 attempts for 54 and 2 rushing touchdowns. Yes, one of those rushing touchdowns, very much so lucky that he wasn't able to get downed in the backfield after tripping twice. But these are the kind of rushing totals that he presented in year 2 and 3 of his career. If we're going to continue to re-implement that back into his game, his fantasy potential is only going to get back into the top 12 standing, just like it was in year 2 and 3 of his career. Josh Griswold took on this defense last week as the offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He is the former passing game coordinator of Liam Cohen. Back when he was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they set up the blueprint as to how to beat the Seattle Seahawks through the air. And hopefully Liam Cohen is going to be able to utilize that and look in the direction of Trevor Lawrence to carry this team, especially considering the Seahawks are incredibly stout in terms of stopping the run. It's only going to lead to even more passing attempts and rushing opportunity for Trevor Lawrence late in this game. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my top 16 quarterback rankings. Let's close out today's video by putting together a couple better plays for tonight's game between the New York Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's check that out right now. All right, so going into tonight's game, I have a couple plays that I really do like. First and foremost, AJ Brown's just been complaining too much. He needs to get himself more receptions. He's been able to go more than 3.5 receptions in 3 of the last 4 games. I would expect him to go more on this number. Alongside of him, I like the idea of Cam Scatterbo, who is going to continue to be the battering ram of this offense to get himself a lot of opportunities within the rushing category. I expect him to surpass 9.5 as he has done that in 3 of the last 3 games as the primary running back of this offense. Even with Tyrone Tracy coming back, Scat is the primary rusher within the attack and should find himself with a lot of opportunity, as we have seen these interdivisional rivals take each other on every single Thursday night thus far this season, and they have been incredibly competitive matchups, one-score games. We're hoping that's going to be the same tonight, in which we can get those opportunities in the direction of Cam Scatterbo. Now, that's one play that I'm going to enter going into tonight. The other play that I wanted to specifically go ahead and suggest is I want to go and just specifically highlight the tight end position in regards to tonight. Dallas Goedert and Theo Johnson. Again, the Thursday night football games have trended incredibly well for tight ends on a short week. I'm hoping he'll be able to surpass 2.5 receptions, as he has accomplished that in 3 of the last 4 games. So we'll go more on that in regards to Dallas Goedert. And additionally, in regards to the potential of Theo Johnson, with Darius Slayton out tonight, the expectation is that he should be able to surpass this number of 2.5 receptions, as he has accomplished it in each of the last 2 games as one of the primary threats of this offense. Even though they have both tough matchups against this opposing team, I'm expecting both of them to find success. So those are 2 plays. The 2 tight ends, and of course, AJ Brown and Scat going into tonight. Best of luck. Of course, be sure to use code EDGE today to sign up and get a free $10. But if you want those rankings, of course, making that first time deposit minimum of 10 and making that first time play minimum of $1 within a real cash play will get you my rankings every Sunday morning for the remainder of the season to set your lineups and help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. I'll be back later tonight, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.